There's one thing you're sure to find in Davos each year: snow. But delegates of the World Economic Forum meeting this year also found snowmen. Not one or two, but 193 of them. Hello and welcome to this very special show. I'm Shweta Rajpal Kohli and we come to you from the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, Switzerland, where India was clearly the star attraction. A business-friendly and stable government and the collapse of oil prices making the India story the talk of Davos this year. Mrs. Bhattacharya, what's the interest on India looking like here? Are people really talking about India the way the government would like them to?
Yes, definitely. I think the interest this time is much more than it was last year the same time. And people are really looking at India as the second most important country to look at after the US.
Right.
So I think the interest is high. Within India too, I think we realize that we are at the crossroads, that we really need to capture this moment, this opportunity that has been given to us, and that we must not delay in doing so. And therefore, I am very optimistic at this point of time.
All right, optimism there. Martin Wolf, you're someone who can view it from the outside in many ways. And what Arundhati Bhattacharya here is telling us is that there are two bright spots, America and India. Do you agree with that assessment?
I think it's true that there's a very strong optimism about India. There's a forecast, well-known forecast now, that India will grow faster than China.
Right.
And my own view is that under very plausible assumptions over the next generation, it should be the fastest growing big economy in the world. Right. And I think that's now quite widely shared. And I agree also that relatively minor but nonetheless very significant policy changes are needed to achieve that. However, I would stress that there is still quite a lot of interest in China. It's not over. So it remained, and there's a very large representation here from China, including the Premier, so it remains a very big and important country, and lots of people hope that it will continue to do well. But undoubtedly, India has become a very significant focus of attention, potential and of course hope for the new government.
When you have concerns around infrastructure, concerns around the talk turning into real action, we've seen some grand announcements in the area that you operate in: financial inclusion, the government getting a Guinness record for the number of bank accounts it's opened. Are these significant announcements that will lead to actual concrete achievements on the ground, or just mere photo opportunities?
No, I think they are very significant announcements, not only because of the way they have been done, but the way it's been packaged this time. Financial inclusion has been talked about earlier. Why did it never get off? It never took off because we didn't have interoperability. We didn't have enough access. Now today, when you're opening accounts, you're also giving them a card that enables them to take out their money not only at ATMs but also at POS machines. So you're making it very, very accessible. Not only that, you're also sort of giving them an incentive to actually operate those cards, because then they get free health insurance and life insurance. So this time I think the program has been very well thought out. Not only have they become much more accessible, but we are also now linking all of these accounts with the Aadhaar number,
right,
which, as you know, it's a unique number that is based on your biometrics. And once you have that, if the government starts giving its subsidies through this particular account, they'll be able to cut down substantially on the leakage that happens in subsidy bills, thereby enabling the government to give that money to some more productive purpose. So I think this time round, this entire build is being done on a much better way.
And it has a much stronger foundation, yes, on which it's being built.
Absolutely.
Sunil Mittal, we've been seeing a reasonable amount of gloom about India the last 3 or 4 Davoses. There's a sense that India lost the plot. What happened to the India story? There was so much happening, it went sour a bit. Different mood?
Oh yes, it's a very different mood. I mean, India is being talked about. Sessions are full up of the ministers. They are very heavily committed. I think you heard from the 3 of the big investors or potential policy players in the world to talk very positively about India. Very high levels of interest from the US. Having said that, I think the level needs to be stepped up significantly.
I was part of a group in September during the UN meetings that had a chance to meet him. I found him very impressive. He's a straight talker. He's very supportive of business. And the question I asked him, or the statement I made, was help us be more efficient in terms of being in the ag and food business in India. Right now, when we develop new products, new innovations for food, it takes up to a year to get it approved. And it simply therefore takes longer for us to get it to the market, to the consumers. So a key point for us is help eliminate the bureaucracy, help speed to market for a company like Cargill. But my sense was that he wants to help India's economy, he wants to help the consumer, and that he will do whatever it takes to help a company like ours succeed and thrive.
Let me just add that I was in that breakfast, and it was unusual. Most heads of state or prime ministers, they give their little speech and then they maybe listen for a minute and then they go. He let every single person give their little presentation, and he responded to every point that everybody gave. So he was obviously well informed and obviously knows what he's talking about. In the private equity world, one thing that I try to encourage is to have a larger indigenous private equity industry. China has a very large private equity industry. In India, it's not that large. One of the reasons is that insurance companies and pension funds cannot invest in private equity in India. I hope that change can be made so that more people can benefit from what private equity can do in India.
Anything that you said at the breakfast, in addition to what we just heard?
Well, we all said that we thought that encouraging more foreign direct investment was good, and that his openness was quite welcome. There aren't that many Indian prime ministers who were as familiar with our businesses as he was, so we were all impressed, and I think he left New York and left Washington with a lot of new supporters and friends.
The star couple, Bill and Melinda Gates, shared their vision for the next 15 years with NDTV as they kick off their project on educating girls this year.
In terms of education and health, what's different about the Gates Foundation is that you do have a technology aspect to everything. That education you're going to get through online learning, which is going to transform. It's not going to be the old style of just listen to somebody lecture. You can question back, interact. Tell us a bit about technology and change in health and in education.
So Bill and I are both huge believers in innovation, and technology is one innovation that just really sparks change. And I think in the sector of education, what we're seeing today in the United States is that having access to a great teacher is so critically important. And yet most students around the world don't have access to a great teacher. So we're looking at how do you have a great teacher supplemented with fantastic online tools, because then you can personalize the learning. So as those technologies come along, then it will be a matter of how are other governments and other private citizens going to deploy them in their own countries. And we think that will be a lever of huge change in the education system. So no matter where you live, even if you're a remote rural area and maybe you have a great teacher who takes you up through 4th grade, you still have access to great learning even beyond that.
Now, I've seen you doing a pretty ghastly thing, drinking water from a sewer. But I just kept thinking, well, if you can do that, you can clean the Ganga. Is that a really viable thing that you can, where sewage goes into, say, a river, you can build what you have, that is omnipressor?
Omniprocessor, exactly.
Omniprocessor, yeah.
Yeah, all the technologies that clean up sewage have been very expensive. Yes. And the way it's done in the United States is we have clean water and we make that water dirty and we pipe it back, and that would be very expensive. And so we challenged engineers to make a much lower cost processing system. And we said not only do we want it to process the sewage, if possible, we want it to generate something valuable, some fertilizer chemicals, some clean water, and some electricity. And then instead of people dumping the sewage in the water or just on the land, they can pay a very small fee to take it to this processing center, and then it'll be cheap enough that the law will really get people to comply with that. So the fact that the government said, hey, we're serious about sanitation, and there's this recognition that the malnutrition levels in India, which are much higher than they should be, that this lack of good sanitation processing is a very significant element in that. It means that we see this technology, although we only have one machine right now. We're looking for partners, and we want to ramp it up and get it out into the Indian cities.
So it could be feasible for India, because in India, our big problem is our rivers are dead. Most of our rivers are dead, and the Ganga, our most holy river, and it signifies India, is in really bad shape. We did a study where we measured every 100 kilometers the water quality, and it deteriorates dramatically before and after every town. The difference is huge. So if one could is it actually feasible to put these at the sewage points?
Absolutely. I mean,
Wow,
this is probably a 5 to 10 year project, but there are examples in the West of taking rivers like the Potomac outside our capital
Yes.
that was a disaster. There's two sources of problems. One, the biggest is sanitation.
Yes.
Then you also have to look and see if there's industrial waste going in there and tighten up the laws and have practical solutions like this Omni processor that processes the sewage and creates value.
Wow, it really, I mean, cleaning the Ganga and cleaning our rivers can transform lives in India.
Time now for a quick break here on the show. Plenty more lined up for you on the other side, including some big global voices. Stay tuned. Absolutely fascinating about the World Economic Forum meeting here in Davos is that it's a melting pot of some of the world's greatest minds, and conversations take place on a range of issues, from the state of global economy to science and technology.
You were saying China seems to be coming back, or is it a secular slight slowdown?
What China is doing is, once again, a very smart and a very painful adjustment. They're going to go from this almost exclusively export-oriented model, which relied on a very weak currency. We all know the factors. And a trading partner which was more than happy to buy Chinese and then repatriate its borrowings back to China in the form of government bonds, which were held in very large size. That system served to generate jobs in China for a long period of time, allowed China to industrialize, invest in its infrastructure, and kept inflation in check in the US. It was a very nice example of what global trade can do. Of course, it runs its course, as indeed this did. So my take on China is that they are now switching and focusing on domestic demand. They've fixed their banking system. They've taken some tough steps. And in so doing, their growth slowed down. From everything which I read and the analysis which I've heard, Chinese growth this time around is going to be more resilient, more broad-based. It may not hit the numbers that you've seen in the past, but frankly, they need
higher base also.
They need 6.5–7% to keep their job creation in equilibrium. From the numbers which I see, I think they'll achieve it.
Wow, that's actually a very positive outlook for China.
There are some issues. There's plenty of it. This adjustment is not yet completely done. There's a governance mechanism which is being thought through. There's all these probes on the corruption side. There's a shadow banking system. It's a very vigorous and engaged.
But you know, the kind of model you described, which is so, you described so well about how China grew, is that over for India? Can India do that again? Or are we, they were in a highway where there was no cars, now the highway is packed with cars, and we are one of the cars, or do we have to look for a different model?
So there's two ways of looking at it. One is made in India, which I think is what you're referring to, the right strategy? And the second question is the timing right or not? India needs to create, again, you'll know this better than I do, 1 million jobs a month, right, just to stay where it is. And that assumes that none of the farming sector comes in, I believe, which of course is going to happen. So you've got the twin engines of a young labor force, which is being added to significantly, and urbanization, which means a higher percentage will move from the secondary sector into hopefully the primary or tertiary sector. India needs to create jobs. It has a relatively low share of manufacturing as percentage of GDP, so there's room to expand. Now, the export game has become very tough, which is what you alluded to. There's slack in the global system, there's a lot of competition, but that's okay. The fact is, a country of India's potential and the great clarity with which this government is driving that message, we ought to be able to definitely move in the right direction. The challenge, of course, is going to be ease of doing business. So if there's a single index I worry about, India is one of the hardest countries in the world to do business. It's well understood, well recognized.
Issue, and
unless that's tackled, it'll be difficult to become an export giant a la China.
Finally, the most important question of all that I've asked you today, who's going to win the World Cup? Number one. And what changes should we make in our team? Now this is serious, this is a serious question. The rest about the economy and all that.
This is not.
This is serious.
So the easy answer would be Australia, because they've got the home conditions and all the rest of it, and they look a reasonably good side. The pressure of playing in front of their home crowds will be intense. Their batting looks a little suspect to me, and their bowling is a bit young as well, but I would probably say Australia has to be, you have to have Australia on that list. On paper and potential, South Africa by a mile. If they did not have that famous C word hanging over them and their dismal World Cup record. If you take a look at Steyn, Mokel opening the bowling, they've got a good leg spinner coming in. You saw what A.B. de Villiers did. The conditions will suit them. They field really well. They bat deep. So they've got all the pieces.
This is something you really thought about very
No,
clearly.
actually, I've been thinking about the ECB, frankly, all day.
All right. But I totally agree.
My dark horse call is New Zealand. Watch them.
You know what? Australia is top of the bookies, probability of winning. South Africa second, India third, and New Zealand a close fourth.
So now comes the key question. I very rarely doubt the wisdom of markets, but in this case, I would say at this stage, India's chances are overestimated by those bookies.
7-time Grammy winner will.i.am was also here to talk about new ways of learning, technology and inequality. I got a chance to catch up with him. Pleasure to talk to you. What brings you to Davos?
Davos brings me to Davos. Bright minds, influential folks, big hearts, people that want to go out and change the world, people that are concerned about the world.
Is that true? Because many believe that this is all about just the elite congregating here. It's all about just the 1% of the world who come here, but only those who belong to the top 1% of the world.
Well, that's true.
Right.
That's true. But and in that 1%, there's 1% of them that want to do good in the world. So just because that is a fact that the 1% are here in Davos does not mean we should not try our best to influence them and encourage them to do good in the world. So it's an opportunity to rub shoulders and inspire folks that have the ability to move the needle and bring resolution and change for those that they're in need. You want to take advantage of that and come here with an open heart and open mind to hopefully shed light and bring resolution.
You're such a multifaceted personality: music, technology, philanthropy, working on inequality, getting children to learn coding. What part of it excites you the most?
The results. The thing that excites me the most is when you see a kid that started here and now they're here. They started with no skill and then they have skills. That's exciting. And there's people that I work with. So there's this guy. His name is Deepak and Apu. And I was telling him about my neighborhood.
Okay.
And they said...
Did you take Indian names?
Yeah.
They're based in Bangalore?
Yeah, so I have a company and I have an office in Bangalore.
Right.
So I was telling them, I come from the projects. I grew up poor. And then they was like, well, this is nothing compared to where we come from. Where we come from is much worse than you. And these guys I was like, you need to come and mentor my kids.
Right.
And we would love to. And because they are so brilliant, Deepak and Apu and Encore, these guys are my new heroes. And I'm so happy that I work with them.
You get the accent very, very right.
Because I've been working with them for a long time now.
Okay, quick question on India. I know he has to go. One quick question on India. What inspires you more? Musicians like A.R. Rahman or the people who are working on technology sitting there in Bangalore?
A.R. is a big influence. Asha Bosley is my hero. And Black Eyed Peas, we've been working and inspired by Indian music for a long time now. Don't Funk With My Heart is a song from a classic Bollywood song.
Right.
Ella Funk, because this album was inspired by Ganesh, and Monkey Business was inspired by Hanuman. So I've been inspired by Indian culture and Hinduism for a very long time.
And now technology too.
And now technology.
And with that, we come to the end of this show. Thanks so much for watching. It's a goodbye from me and all the snowmen behind me. With camera person Arif Radhu and producer Himanshu, this is Shweta Rajpal Kohli reporting from Davos for NDTV.